I'm going to start off with just the perennial reminder. We do have somewhere in the room some field notes, that notepad that you can add things to. So if you had a question that you didn't get to pose, or if there's just something lingering with you over yonder, we encourage you to go and archive your thoughts. That'll be helpful for us at the end of the conference when we sort of gather and summarize what we've all done across these many rooms here today. So yeah, just to open us up here, people often talk about the environmental problems with AI. And I think sometimes folks are coming from a place of very narrowly cast concern. Like they're the sorts of people who worry about using too much water when they're brushing their teeth or the like. Sometimes I'm that person. But when I hear people, share these kind of statistics that a conversation with ChatGPT is the same as dumping out a 500 milliliter bottle of water, or having a back and forth with a chatbot that might be as much energy as charging your phone halfway. I'm less interested in the precise measurements we're talking about, and I'm much more curious about what stands behind them, right? Why are we using these environmental forms of critique to register concern with these technologies, and who's on the other side of that environmental problem, that bottle of water, that set of electrons. So it's in that spirit that I want to bring us into this conversation here. And I again, just consider myself incredibly lucky to be here on the stage with these four experts. We're going to hear from Sasha Luccioni, who is the co-founder of the Sustainable AI Group. It's an independent research organization doing really, really important work. Again, investigating those empirical questions and how and where they matter. Next to her, we have Jamie Kneen, the National Program co-lead of MiningWatch. It's a nonprofit that works in solidarity with Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities dealing with the impacts of mining. Joining us from Zoom, we have Naolo Charles, the founder of the Black Environmental Initiative. He's an expert on environmental racism and equity principles in Canada. And last but not least, we get a second opportunity to hear from Chief Sheldon Sunshine of the Sturgeon Lake Cree, when we're really excited about that. So I'm going to start us off with a couple of questions scoped for each individual panelist. We'll go around twice, and then we'll open up things for community questions and comments. I'm going to start with Sasha. So Sasha, you've done a huge amount of work assessing the environmental profiles of these technologies, often in spite of the lack of information that we get from these companies about what's happening where, what is using what. So I'm just sort of wondering, in your assessments out there, what do we know for sure about the material consequences of trends in the industry? And where do we still have really problematic gaps in our knowledge?
That's a good... Should it on? Can you hear me? No, straight, yeah. That's a good question. Actually, that's how kind of my whole career in this field started. Rewind 8 years ago now, I was working in applied AI research, and somehow, don't ask me how, I ended up working in AI and finance. Had a little crisis, quit my job, went to academia, and I was really working on the positive applications of AI to fight climate change. So at MILA, it's a research institute here in Montreal, and then someone came up to me and they were like, well, how do you know if you're doing more good than harm with your research? Because it was the beginning of the first studies about AI's environmental impacts, and they're like, well, you say you're doing this positive work, but what if it's actually costing more energy and more natural resources? And then I was like, well, as a scientist, I don't have an answer to this question, and if I don't have an answer, I need to find the answer. And essentially I started looking, and then I started realizing that it's actually really, really hard to get this information. Essentially, the only numbers that are out there are the ones that are coming from scientists, including myself, where we ran the experiments ourselves. We got the numbers. Essentially any other data is usually a proxy or an estimate. And what's really frustrating is actually the numbers are out there. They're just not being communicated. I mean, essentially, it's often the answer is, oh, it's so complicated. Well, it's not a single model. It's not a single system. It's really hard to get a single number, blah, blah, blah. But actually, the numbers are out there. Once you get these people who work at these companies behind closed doors, they will be like, yeah, of course we have the numbers, but they make us look bad. So we're not gonna give them out, right? It's why would we do that? So it's been really frustrating. I think we're starting to see pushback and pressure, and so I've come a long way in my kind of thinking. At first, I was like, if I haven't run the model, if I haven't tested the data, I don't trust these numbers. Now I'm starting to accept a little bit more kind of proxies and ranges, but also what I'm seeing is that now, because these systems are being used in companies, companies have really big pressure. That's actually why I quit my job like last week essentially and started this company, because now we can actually put pressure on AI developers to provide us this information, because they need us as users and the companies and the organizations we work in order to make money essentially. And if we start saying collectively, we're not going to use your tool unless you give us water, energy, I don't know, like for example, even minerals, et cetera, like we're going to use your competitor, that's going to become a collective pressure. And so essentially, I think that right now the numbers do exist, but we need to put like this bottom up pressure in order to share them.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so fascinated in that list, right? Like water, energy, like those parts are a little more countable. And then the mineral part, it gets really tricky. So Jamie, I'm wondering, your organization's done really, really important work on the supply chain of the chips that sit in the GPUs that get powered and cooled in all these ever increasingly large data centers. I'd like to know more about how that perspective changes the way that you think about harms and benefits of digital technology. Like, who pays the cost? Who profits?
So it's the communities affected by mining who pay that cost. The cloud is not a cloud; it's a physical thing. I've seen the cloud. It was a upstream and downstream. It's a giant warehouse full of materials and metals that sucks up water and energy and spits out. Well, we all know what it spits out. Electrons, let's say, to just gloss it over. And so we've been working for a long time now on, supporting communities and trying to change the way that mining is done so that it's less destructive, because it is inherently destructive, and people need to understand the scope and scale of that aspect of this, that this is, ripping up chunks of the earth and processing it, which is also very energy intensive, to turn it into the things that we use every day, which is now increasingly turning into digital tech. Right? And that's shifting the kinds of materials that we're using. So as Christopher Poland said, we started off the century using half a dozen elements of the periodic table, and now we're using up pretty much all of them. And, for all of these very specific applications. So, what that means is, different applications have different technologies and different metals and materials involved in them. But they are all coming from somewhere and destroying watersheds and deforesting and displacing communities and wrecking people's livelihoods and local economies to make that happen. And the dynamic, I think it's actually started, within the last decade in terms of justifying all of this in terms of the energy transition, that, well, if we need electric cars and all this electrification, we're going to need all of these materials. And that is suddenly being, again, within the last few years, being usurped by or diverted into digital tech and data centers and so on. So, the copper for transmission, the silver tin, the silica itself, these supply chains are global and very intense. So that's what we're up against. I can talk about, how that plays out within that, what the specific relationship is in terms of AI being used in mining, in terms of the actual materials that go into AI applications or the actual, the so-called cloud, but also what that means for that renewable energy transition, that suddenly the demand for electricity is ballooning, and not only creating new fossil fuel demand, which shouldn't even be there, but also putting a lot of pressure on renewable energy, which
recording in progress,
which to me is actually needed for better purposes. And I think that's really, in a sense, if we're going to do destructive activities, we need to do them better and maybe try and cut back on our consumption of these things. but also make sure that they're being used for things that are really important. So, if we need renewable energy, then, it should not be for crypto mining or data centers. It should be for ensuring that people can keep their medicine cold, that keep their food preserved, and there's I think, a global inequity here that doesn't get into these conversations enough to say that energy poverty and energy justice is a serious global problem. And the overconsumption in North America and Europe is all the more obscene when you think of people who can't cook their dinner because they don't have the energy to do it with. I'll stop there.
Thank you for that. Yeah. My next question is for Naolo, who I see we've got back online. Good to see you. Naolo, you know this, but not enough Canadians, I think, know this. But our country here has a very long history of environmental racism. The question for you here, Naolo. So the Black Environmental Initiative has done really, really important work showing how polluting industries, waste infrastructures, all too often get sited near Indigenous communities and historically Black communities. Now we're seeing this new wave of AI infrastructure getting planned and built. And so I'm wondering, from that environmental justice perspective, how do you think we should make sense of this story?
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's really nice to be here. As we all know, we have this Canadian billionaire, Kevin O'Reilly, and he's behind this hyperscale AI data center project in Utah. And I think another one, a $70 billion one in Alberta that maybe we're going to hear about later. And I know he was recently interviewed, and people asked him what he thought about the people's concerns on these AI data centers. And what he said is that out of all the people who are developing AI data centers, he's the only one who had a degree in the environment, and that he totally understood that the concerns were about air quality, heat, water, and just energy consumption. And then he scratched his head and he said something really brilliant. He said, but our data shows us that 90% of the people who are protesting in Utah right now were busing from another state, and that these are professional protesters. And I heard a lot of that narrative. I just wanted to kind of do a bit of a commercial break. I'm running a small environmental justice organization with 3, 4, 5 staff. If there are people that are paying professional protesters of AI data centers, I'm willing to do that. Okay, so you guys should look into that. I also wanted to talk about this other billionaire who used to be in Canada before, and who created something they call the supercomputer AI Colossus in Memphis. And he built that in 122 days. So you may wonder, how can you do an AI data center in 122 days in an industry where it takes normally a couple of years to build that kind of infrastructure? It's very simple. First, you pick a community that is already considered a sacrifice zone. You take an industrial facility that you repurpose for that purpose. You install maybe a dozen of methane gas turbines. You find a way to get local officials and facility officials to sign an NDA, and you build. No consultation, no advance notice, no town halls, nothing. And so why did he do that? Because Memphis, Tennessee is 60% Black population. So really no one cares, right? So you can do that. And the reason why I wanted to start my interventions with these 2 examples is because, in my opinion, the problem behind this issue of AI data center is, although we present it as an emerging issue, it's not really a new story. It's really an old story, and it's a story about a particular form of culture. And the problem is not really the technology. The problem is the culture that is behind it. And it's the culture that I would maybe call the culture of the poison. And the reason why I say that is most of us ordinary people, when we look at this, we don't understand how is that possible that a corporation can come in the community and install an AI data center and use most of the water. It makes no sense. But when you look at the history of that culture, it makes total sense, right? And we talk a lot about environmental racism when we look at Indigenous communities, Black communities, and we talk about these specific patterns. But one of the things I teach in environmental racism education is that Black and Indigenous communities are also the canaries in the coal mine. And what it means is that the things that are happening to them tend to be a preview of what may happen to other communities later. And today, one of maybe the great things we see in that story is that we have many people across the political spectrum that seem to have the same feeling about the AI data centers. And maybe this is a moment where we can all unite and kind of find a way to get solidarity. But at the same time, many of the people in rural America and other areas that are complaining about the AI data centers, many of them voted for Donald Trump, right? And Donald Trump, on his first day in office, was surrounded by big tech. And what did he do? He made an announcement about the Stargate project, billions of dollars investing in AI infrastructure. And to me, the reason why I want to focus my intervention on that is we don't fully understand the connections between the issues and the problem of colonialism and racism in our society and the continuation of polluting industry and the continuation of that system. And maybe I'm going to end there. The problem that I see with the AI data centers is old systems that are using new systems as an argument to keep going. So AI is seen as the future. And then you have these old technologies, fossil fuels, nuclear, natural gas, coal, that we don't imagine in our future, but they find a way to connect themselves in the imagination of the people in the future now. It's like now you have no choice to do AI, and you also have no choice to use all this fossil fuel energy, because what else are you going to do? So I'm going to end there.
Good job. Thank you so much. One thing I'll add to that, another thing Donald Trump did in that very busy first day was cancel a voluntary framework for tech companies to disclose data about the environmental impacts of different models. And so that kind of tells you that this was a favor done on behest of some of those donors, which brings us back to that question of like, what do we do when we don't have the data? What do we do when like the past and the future are all colliding at the same time? And I think a lot of us are wondering that alongside you, Chief Sunshine. You gave us such a wonderful overview of how things are going in Treaty 8. I just invite you to expand anything further you want to add to that conversation. And what in particular does this question around struggling for data look like when we certainly do not have conditions for free, prior, and informed consent on the ground here?
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, all of you. They're very, very interesting and very enlightening. Thinking about this whole AI data stuff and dealing with the mega project that's proposed in our territory. To give you an idea of where it is, from my house, it's about an hour and 20 minutes. And so, like I said earlier, that our people lived on the land. They built those roads out there, and a lot of our people are buried out there. And so when they're talking about new technology, and the gentleman was absolutely right, we are impacted, and yet it doesn't seem to have any thought from the province and their desire to get this project approved and pushed through. Had a meeting with Premier Smith on this project specifically, and they wanted to know how they could help us better understand on what information we're looking for. And shortly after that meeting, we got a lot of information. So when we're talking about how it's going to impact our people, I mentioned earlier that our people sustain themselves on the land. There's a lot of our people that go out hunting and trapping and harvesting the animals that rely on these on the environment. When we do it in a good way, it's not we don't take more than we need. It's always been something that we've done to help sustain the environment and the fish and the animals in our territory. So when we see these things happening, the government policies, the Alberta Energy Regulator, the Alberta Consultation Office. I mentioned earlier about the challenges that we face within those processes. They're failing not only us, they're failing the average Albertan, the average Canadian, when they expedite these projects. And we're seeing it more and more every day. We had filed an appeal, like I said, on the sour gas well. We lost the appeal, and the next step was to raise it even further, but we only had 7 days to do that. So our teams are working hard to get that submission in by Tuesday, and it is really unfair to the people in the area when it has significant concerns on our way of life. Yeah, I'm not sure if I answered the question, but
Absolutely. Yeah. For the second round, I'm going to work in reverse, so staying with you, Chief Sunshine. One thing that I found, well, many things are outrageous about the Wonder Valley project. One of them is that if you press developers, if you press the province, from what I understand, one of the reasons they say we don't need to give environmental disclosures, we don't need to do an environmental impact assessment, is that the land we want to build on already has a history of development with oil and gas. So, yeah, boo. And, on the one hand, that's clearly bullshit. On the other hand, maybe there's an interesting kind of admission there. I'm sort of wondering, do you see more continuity from this industry versus others? Is it the same story repeating?
Absolutely, same story repeating. Just at a larger scale, in a specific area, right? So all those other resource development projects are still going to go on, and yet we're going to have this major development. And that's one of the comments that really struck me when we had a conversation with the O'Leary Group, is that it's going to be the largest project in Canadian history, and yet it doesn't require an environmental impact assessment from Alberta. It makes you question on some of the processes or their thought process on how they don't even care about the impact it's going to have on the land, and that's something that we care deeply about. And, and I think more people need to become aware of what's really happening. I've seen in the Utah where they're having town hall meetings and they're not allowing the people to speak up to it. So, that's just nonsense to me. And I think it really has to become a larger group that needs to step up. And so I agreed to come here so that we could share our message and make some connections so that we can have a unified voice in challenging some of these things.
Yeah. Well, speaking of how that voice gets made and what lessons we can take from history, Naolo, I wanted to kick this to you. Thinking about what environmental justice has looked like in Canada over the decades, what's your vision for what meaningful resistance might look like? What kind of policies, what protest tactics, what organizing strategies do you have in mind?
Well, so I think first maybe I'd like to take a bit of a step back, because what I'd like to do is really try to maybe share my vision of what the history behind this might be, and maybe that can point us to potential solutions, right? And I'm sorry, listen, I grew up as an African, and while we talk about complex things, we like to tell stories. Okay, so this is the story I want to tell you. So a long time ago, most of us in the room, even if I'm not in the room, most of us here, we have an ancestor somewhere. They used to be on the land. They used to be able to grow food on their land. They used to be free, have access to the commons. And then at some point, something happened, and the Lord came in. And then the Lord came in and said, hey, this land is mine now. So now you work for me, okay? And in Europe, for instance, this happened during the enclosures. And when that happened, you had a new class of landless people who now became people who had to work for the empire, and they became part of the colonial projects, and they went in other places around the world to also do the same thing that happened to them to other ordinary people, right? And the reason why I want to start the story this way is that since a long time ago, the empire and the culture of the empire has always relied on us being complicit in what they're doing. So AI, see how AI came, like ChatGPT, we all got super excited. And then over time you realize, oh, actually, when I'm using ChatGPT, I'm actually causing all this environmental impact. And this is part of the way our entire economy works. It's not just the AI data centers. So I want to even forget about AI data centers for now and just look at the internet. The internet that we call virtual is not virtual. The internet is physical. The internet only exists because there are thousands and thousands of submarine cables deep in our oceans that are connecting continents, like digital snakes or like a digital octopus that is wrapping his hand around the planet. And we have created that a long time ago. Like the British Empire created something they called the Or Red Line. That was for telegraph technology. And the internet now relies on the same kind of networks, and it follows the same routes. Okay, so there's a long history of how technology that we use is made invisible to us, right? And the AI data centers, what is nice with that is that they can't really hide it that much. The only thing that they can do is normalize it. So now the communities that are being impacted by that, if we don't pay attention to the things that are happening to them, then it's going to be almost like it's invisible, right? And that culture, in my opinion, is the big problem. But the other thing I wanted to say is that even if you look at the financial equation, because a lot of us think that this is for money, but even if you look at the financial equation of the AI data centers, you're putting thousands and thousands, if not millions, of microchips that are created at some point. In just a few years, they're going to be passed by technology, because we know how technology functions. It takes several years for you to build that AI data center. And then you end up with technology that is no longer of the time. How does that make any sense? And it only makes sense because if you're thinking about the financial aspect of it, the financial market of it, the financialization of that. And so we had, a long time ago, we had the railroad barons, right? They built railroads around the world that built cities and communities, but he also destroyed communities. But a lot of how they were making money was through the financial markets as well. So I think we have to look at all this different history and to better understand where all of this is coming from. And the response to that, in my opinion, has to be a counterculture. And it has to be a counterculture of unity between people and a counterculture that doesn't follow what the empire wants us to do. Let me finish maybe with another example that's also about history. At some point, we all know, I hope we all know at some point, that Europe became addicted to sugar. The same way that some people are addicted to TikTok right now. And so sugar was so addictive that Queen Elizabeth at the time, I don't know if you guys know, but she was so addicted to it that she consumed so much of it that her teeth became darkened, right? She had dark teeth. And why am I saying that? Is that because she had so much power, that dark teeth became a symbol of power and prestige in the society at the time, right? So people were darkening the teeth to look more powerful. And the darkening of the teeth, you have to think about what that means. It means that even when something is destructive and is a poison, if it's associated to power, we aspire to that. So the AI data centers right now, and we are resisting to it, there may be some people in the elites out there who see it as a badge of honor. They are launching projects and people are resisting. So if we're dealing with that type of culture, how do you think we can fight it? are we going to fight it with just policies? Are we just going to fight it with one protest here and there? We have to fight it with a cultural revolution, and it has to be a bottom-up, multiracial, everywhere. We have to really change things. And so to me, that's the way I see it. And so I'm going to end there. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah, so much there. There's a casino people are gambling in, and not only with their money, not only with our pension funds money, but with our waters and our lands. So Jamie, on that subject, right? Like here in Canada, we hear a lot about the idea of free, prior, and informed consent, even if we don't always have a lot of clarity about how those principles get applied and if they get applied at all, like inside our borders, beyond them. So thinking about the mining part of the tech stack, what does that look like on the ground for the communities that like are assessing a proposal to come into their territories, or thinking about how maybe to refuse that?
I'm going to circle my way into that because what Naolo said was so good.
Yeah.
And I want to pick that up and say, you know, what's happening on the ground in remote parts of the country, in Indigenous communities especially, is something that we need to build solidarity around and build into that concept that Naolo was talking about, that the way through this is together. And building, you know, all of those connections and linkages is how we're going to do that. It's not by, you know, major confrontations. I think, you know, in my perspective, we need to do all the things. We need to work at the policies and demonstrate that we do know what we're talking about. We need to do the research and have the facts, but we also need to build those networks and build solidarity so that those folks are not on their own, and they know they're not on their own, and they feel it, and we can actually, you know, not be allies but co-conspirators in a bigger plan and start taking over that way. So, you know, from the ground up, but with all of those things in mind. And, you know, what that means, so coming back to your question, you know, we've got First Nations in several parts of the country who are challenging in court the Crown's ability to dispose of territories and to create legal interest for mining companies in their territories. In Michibiconock, and I'll point to the organizing that's going on around that, supporting that case in Quebec. In BC, the province has just gotten leave to appeal the Gitga'ala Ehasat decision, which actually turned things over, and there were some allusions this morning made to BC and the you know, the idea that Native people are going to suddenly start kicking people off their land, but that's the fundamental idea. There is that Canada has actually signed up to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the concept of free, prior, informed consent, which breaks down, you know, free means free of political pressure, but also free of commercial pressure. And we can see the Canadian government attacking this on both levels, you know, with the idea of economic reconciliation, which is we will lend you money so that you can buy yourself into a project on your territory, which you are then liable for all of the destructive impacts in your own land for your own inheritance. And we, the government, we, the investors, will sit outside and watch this happen and gloat and benefit from it. And, you know, again, it comes back, that comes back to something else that Naolo mentioned, which is the financialization and the fact that we have all of this investment coming in and looking for places where it can land and make more money, whether that's, you know, whether the project is real, the impacts are real, and that's the important thing. And then, you know, prior means, well, before something happens, you have to be able to make your own decision. that before something comes in, before you're committed, before the impacts start, so that you're not negotiating from a position of weakness. You're actually saying, is this even going to start? Informed. We've talked about having that data and being able to have independent analysis and information, having the space and time to make an informed decision according to culturally appropriate processes and governance structures. And then consent. Well, consent, when I was younger, consent was not a thing we talked about, right? And governments did things and individuals did things that we're not proud of, that we are, now lead to apologies and compensation because there was not consent. And it's now understood that, on a personal level, on a medical level, on a social level, this is a very important concept in governance and accountability, is developing consent, and not as a checkbox. So the prior part doesn't mean it's okay, we'll go ahead with this. It means we will start and we will maintain this conversation as to whether these conditions are still acceptable as we go. And what happens next is not something that is decided by the investor or the government agency. It's decided in conversation with respect, and that's how consent happens. And consent includes no. It is not a different way of saying yes, and we've heard this specifically around the UN Declaration, that it's not a veto, and it means consultation. Canada is very fond of changing consent back to consultation, because consultation you can ignore, and consent you can't. And the thing is, what we're hearing increasingly across Canada and globally is communities saying no, saying they're not willing to become sacrifice zones, to make sacrifices that, whether they're benefiting partially or not at all, but essentially for someone else's benefit on someone else's terms. And that's the crucial piece of that. And what I'm really concerned about is that hidden behind this is the threat of force. That if you don't have consent and you still want to take something, you will do it anyway. And we've seen that in Canada in Wet'suwet'en. We've seen it in other parts of the country. We've, going back to the 2000s when, the chief and 5 of the 6 council members of the Kitchinewicz-Beniniwig First Nation were jailed for stopping mining exploration in their territory. So this is not a new thing, and it's not a foreign thing, although obviously it happens around the world. This is something, again, that we need to see and identify and stand with.
Thank you. My last full question here is for Sasha. So part of the reason why Kevin O'Leary thinks there's a business case for building 7.5 gigawatts of data center in Alberta is that the industry, right, like the people in power, have this real bigger is better approach, that the only way to have good AI technology, whatever that means and whatever underexplored dimensions they're holding in their head, is to just throw more compute at it. And I know that this isn't the only world we could build. I know that you've been really, really key in pushing for alternatives. So I'm wondering, just broadly speaking, what can be done to support a plurality of smaller, more appropriately scaled versions of these tools, rather than just assuming that we need one monopoly power to have a carbon-intensive chatbot that will do everything for everyone?
That's a really great question. And actually, if you think about it, AI is not a single thing. And I think that, it's funny because when I started out in the field, when I started doing my PhD, vision, self-driving cars and stuff was the hot thing. And then the language models were kind of just whatever, use them for search. And then in the meantime, they become the new hot technology. But when you think about it, it's really what are you trying to solve as a task? And some tasks are legitimately kind of solvable, or, I don't know, say you want to find a website, you want to find the operating hours of a shop near your home, right? Like you don't want to go there, you want to use the internet. Like that's a valid usage of AI writ large, but currently we're using these very generic, very big, very compute intensive models to do that task, whereas we can be using something that's a lot simpler and a lot less energy intensive. And when you think about like why that is the case, like I wrote a paper about this recently. It's often from the perspective of the model developers, it makes sense for them to have one model that everyone uses, just because you never know what someone's going to throw at the model, right? Like, is it going to be homework? Is it going to be searching the web? Is it going to be a recipe? Is it going to be whatever, planning a trip? And so they have these big models because for them, it makes sense. They don't need to have 28 different ones. They can have one single model that everyone is querying, and then hence the bigger is better approach. But if you come at it from a user perspective and from a citizen perspective, a citizen of the world perspective, that doesn't make any sense at all. And I think that nowadays we should be pushing back against this like single. Actually, there's this really interesting paper from OpenAI called GPTs are GPTs. It's also very confusing. So GPT in ChatGPT means generative pre-trained transformer. It's like the underlying architecture, like the AI architecture underlying ChatGPT. The other meaning of the acronym that they use is general purpose tools. And they argue that ChatGPT type models are so general purpose. They're like electricity and the wheel and all these different, like, I don't know, the steam engine. And so they're going to transform society. And then it's like a hat trick in the paper. Like the ChatGPT acronym slowly becomes the general purpose technology acronym. And they're like, well, whatever the costs are, whatever the impacts are, however many people are going to lose their job is going to be worth it because this technology is going to revolutionize humanity, right? But it's interesting, like when you start like thinking about it, you can't compare ChatGPT to the wheel. Like it's really not like fundamental perspective. Doesn't make sense, but you can try. You can definitely try to replace things that aren't broken. Like fundamentally that work pretty well. Like searching the web was fine until, generative AI summaries came along. Like I usually found what I was looking for. I didn't need a generative AI model to resume it for me while hallucinating and using a lot of resources. So essentially right now we're trying to fix these technologies with things that are fundamentally not made for that. And I think that we should start pushing back, and whether that be, with our employers, like nowadays my friends tell me that at their jobs they have like dashboards that track how many queries of whatever Copilot or Gemini that they make, and if they don't make enough queries, they get flack from their management saying you didn't query Copilot enough this month, especially for programmers. You should be relying upon it because we're paying for this license, so you better be using it. And so like legitimately it's part of their like KPIs or the way that they get evaluated by their management. And it's crazy because it's like we should be pushing back against this from from a citizen level, from an employee level. And I think that currently, like, this is where it stands. Like, the companies have this pressure to essentially get back their investment that they made. And then we have this pressure, but we could be pushing back a lot more. So I think that knowing that AI is a plurality, knowing that it's not about using the technology, it's like not like having a hammer and everything's a nail, is like thinking about the nail. What do you want to do? Like, is it, screwing it in? Is it taking it out? Is it putting it, like, what is the thing that you're doing, and what AI exists? Like, for example, for searching the web, there are plenty of non-generative AI tools. Like, there's a search engine called Ecosia that's actually really, really great. And so, for example, starting with Ecosia, and if you don't find your answer, and if, it's something a little bit more complex, like turning to a generative AI tool, for example. And, my friends are now like, oh, we use Claude to, make our grocery list for the week and generate. And I'm like, do you really, really, do you need that? And also, like, there have been some studies, for example, from MIT that have shown that people who rely on, like, for example, ChatGPT start, like, losing critical thinking over time. Like, they were looking at essays and stuff like that, and it was like, over time, the people who were constantly, like, looking at ChatGPT, it's actually called This Is Your Brain on ChatGPT, and they found that, like, it actually atrophies the part of our brain that does this critical thinking. And so it's the same for recipes, it's the same for, I don't know, navigation, right? Like, sometimes it's great to use your brain. Like, I biked here, and I didn't look at Google Maps. And so it's nice to keep that humanity, and I think that if we kind of collectively start being a little bit more critical, then it kind of helps push back against the top-down pressure.
Right. Yeah. So I've got one last question here for the whole panel. So this will be a rapid fire kind of situation. Don't expect you to solve this in one. So whatever little piece you want to contribute would be lovely. But it seems like we got a kind of the size of the problem in front of us is going to need a large coalition to tackle it. So when you think about the shape of those kinds of political conjunctures and like how you build a grassroots organization that is bringing people from different concerns, from different places, and getting them to play a part, what does that look like for you? Where are you seeing those like solidarity networks forming, and what might need to be done yet still?
Who's starting?
Whoever would like to be the one on the hot seat can start. And again, don't expect her to solve it in one.
That's something that we've actually been doing with everything that's been happening in the province of Alberta. First Nations are taking exception to a lot of it, and it really galvanized First Nations all across, not only in Alberta but all across Canada, even into the United States with some of the groups there. So we're organizing a grassroots movement from our nation and with all the other nations in Alberta. So like the work has already begun, and for us it'd be easy to jump on this and really push that narrative once we get that all organized. And thanks.
So, Phil.
Okay. So building on that, but there's a lot to do, but I think this is how we do it. I think there are a number of different angles to tackling this. One is going through existing networks. So we've got environmental groups and climate action groups who may not fully understand the implications of what is happening, who may be swallowing the Kool-Aid about AI can actually solve problems more than create them. And that's been a thread in bourgeois environmentalism for a long time. So there's conservationism, and then there's sort of the same approach to broader environmental movements that is, looking at technology. And this is something that I keep coming back to, is like we need to use the technology we have. We know how to do public transit, we just need to do it. We know how to build housing that's affordable and accessible, we need to do it. It's not rocket science, it's not nuclear power, it's not AI, it is the things that we have now, and we can use pencils if we need to communicate. I see a number of people with notebooks and pens, which is awesome. No cloud in sight, right? So, yeah, but working with people who are actually engaged and active, but educating them and trying to bring them into a different political position, and the other side, working with folks who see that something's wrong, but are content to blame immigrants or poor people for their problems, to say that the problems with employment or housing are because all these other people are working and I'm not, rather than working together. And that's, to me, this is something that's been happening over decades, where the right has been out organizing the left, and out there, in public, but also in communities, telling people the wrong story to explain what's going on. And the reality is the same. We're all seeing the same reality, but we have to understand it differently. Or we have to stop understanding it differently and start building a common sense of, but that also means working with people we don't like or don't get along with, and that's tough. I'm not a good person to tell people to do that, because I'm not very good at it. I don't like doing that, but I do see that as really critical, to be able to listen to someone completely bullshitting and figure out, listen to them and sympathize and empathize and say, okay, well, are there different ways of understanding this? Because that's how we're going to turn things around at the other extreme of the political spectrum.
Yeah. And building upon what Jamie said, I spent a couple of years really antagonizing big tech companies and just being kind of unpleasant. I've slightly toned it down, but I also found that when you are in this combative stance, when you're just screw you, this is not the right way, it's really hard to move forward. And so now it's okay, well, you don't want to be fully transparent, where can we meet halfway? And I think that has gone somewhere, but also in the meantime pushing back against the inevitability. Is that a word? Yeah, like, so essentially often like it's like, oh well, it's coming, oh it's already like whatever, solving climate change, or all this like the discourse in parallel that's been like, oh well, it's already, you know, doing these positive things, so whatever the cost is, it's worth it. I think that that's been a really big like mind boggling thing. I think a lot of people see it's going to happen. Like, especially, actually, it's really weird that in Canada we're doing this. It doesn't make much sense. It's like, well, that's happening in the States, so we have to do it too. I found that that's a very kind of common thread. I mean, the States or other places, but it's just like, well, other people are doing it, we have to do it as well. And I think that, like, you know, maybe if we haven't done it yet, maybe there's a reason for it. Like, for example, in terms of building hyperscale data centers, we don't need like 2 or 3 massive data centers in Canada. If presumably we need a certain amount of compute, we can have like 100 small data centers in basements that are recycling heat, that are, you know, doing things in a way that would make so much more sense given our existing like infrastructure, that could be powered by renewables because it's like less like energy drain in one spot. So you don't need like a natural gas plant. You could use existing capacity. You can do all sorts of things, but we're not doing this because we're like, oh, we need to be doing things the way that, you know, other people are doing it. And I think that like calling like bullshit to some extent on that and being like, no, actually you don't, like, no, actually this is not the only solution. Like, I think that we've painted ourselves into a corner being like, well, we have to compete with the States, we have to do AI, or we have to win at AI or whatever it is, and so this is the way of doing it, and since this is the only way of doing it, this is what we have to do. And not just like debunking like little by little each one of those things. It's like, no, it's not a race. No, historically competing with the States is not always the winning strategy. Like, there's like a lot of things to debunk there, and I think if you do it one by one, then you can actually like go at it from different angles, and then it's like, okay, you want to do AI, let's talk about the ways that we can do AI.
Last word to you, Naolo, if you want one.
Yeah, so I would say I would agree with the fact that in terms of us working together and having unity, there are some narratives in society that tend to promote that, and others that tend to not promote that. And I think, in my opinion, we need to win the fight of ideas and repetition of your culture and your message in the public space. That's something we're not very good at that. And maybe the last thing I would say, as someone who's been working in the social sector in many spaces, I've noticed, especially people who consider to be part of the left, sometimes we have a hard time working together because we often think that we have to always agree on everything to work together. And I think that's a bit of a problem. You know, I come from a family where my parents, when they were young, they actually fought like for, in our country where I come from, to have multiple parties. And so they were really into revolution and all that stuff. And I had a conversation with my mom about that. And she told me, in our time, we had a philosophy, and they called it tactical alliance, strategic delineation. So what that means is that you have to be able to understand that sometimes if you share an enemy with someone, you can have an alliance that is a tactical alliance, even if long-term, you guys have a difference of opinions and things like that. And you have to be comfortable doing that because you cannot always agree with people, right? And I think especially in our modern time, that is a huge challenge that we have. But again, old systems acting like they're new systems. There's some old systems that have been created to separate us. And as long as we keep following these old systems, we're not going to be united. So I do believe that, and this is the work I try to do with BEI, with my organization, is working with young people that already have a subculture where they're all together, like they're all multiple races, and they recognize themselves in a certain form of identity of people who like to be in nature, who like to kind of resist the empire, and then we try to kind of empower that movement. Right?
Beautiful. Happily, let's give a big round of applause for our lovely panel. And I'm glad to say we have a wee bit of time for some questions, but not too much. So I would like to preface this opening for queries from the floor. I'd like you to ask, is this a question that will be beneficial to me personally, or is this a question that will benefit the whole room? So peer review your questions and then pose them. I see a hand in the back.
Right. to know. We talked about resistance and local resistance, and intent that are all way like facing opposition. Nobody to do that's like a huge well structured somewhere to deploy. The great there is a mapping, then we can follow the PPSs where we can see what's happening on the tip, where we think why supported was yes.
So the question is there a central place where a person can go, a map perhaps, and see all of these local struggles and think about tying them together?
I know that there's several endeavors, as far as I understand. They're trying to coordinate, but they're not very coordinated for now. There's one that's called Data Center Bombs, which is great. It's this. It's a nonprofit called Data for Good, and they're trying to essentially coordinate. I think they're mostly Europe and the States. I don't think they have that much Canada yet, but once again, they're trying to. But essentially, it's a way of people like submit. There's like a form for submitting, like, hey, there's a data center in my area. You can submit documents, you can submit information, and they're trying to build this local movement around it. I think they did it for. I think it was like oil and gas exploration or something. So they're building upon like the same like approach. There's something in my neighborhood, I want to flag it, and so yeah, data center bombs.
Data Center Watch.
Data Center Watch.
Data Center Watch is an industry group for watching people who resist data centers.
Oh, really?
So we need a Data Center Watch is what I say.
I know there's like a planetary AI planetary alliance as well. I think they're also trying to do grassroots activism, but like the mapping part, I only know of one.
We also have one of Data Center, but the organization I work but so far it's mostly US, yes, but it's called Data Center Impact.
Data Center Impact. Okay.
Aaron Brockovich also is starting on the data centers, and she has a site.
Really?
Yeah.
Aaron Brockovich is on our side. Yeah.
We've worked with the Environmental Justice Atlas, EJ Atlas, which has a number of thematic maps. They don't have the resources to keep doing it for everything, but you may find stuff there, and certainly if people are able to mobilize resources to work with them, it's a great platform.
So I think we've got time for one more question. Who really wants it in your heart of hearts? I saw your hand earlier.
Okay. So we talked about the possibility of a coalition and all that, but I wonder if there's certain folks we shouldn't work with.
Who should not be in our coalition?
I've studied climate science, and the concept of insanity can be applied to many things. AI definitely, but it's climate scientists and environmental scientists saying we're going to get more data, and AI is going to help us get better data, so that we could convince politicians to do something.
Yeah.
We're literally at fascism in the United States.
Yeah.
Carney is not a climate prime minister. He's going all the way the other way. At which point do we stop falling into this trap? And I'm not saying set fire to all the warehouses, maybe a few, but at which point do we collectively decide to not be part of the colonial?
Yeah, so to summarize, who should not be involved in our coalition? The climate justice movement has learned a lot, that there are false friends that you waste your time with if you try to get them to be in your party to give you data. And maybe also like, what are the limits of data collection as the goal we're trying to get? When does that sort of prevent us from running the whole race? Race is a bad metaphor, as you mentioned, this whole AI thing. Anyways, anyone want to speak to that?
Well, when we were talking earlier about working with people that we don't like or get along with, that doesn't mean they're part of our coalition. That means we're working with them as neighbors, as people that we need to work with because we all inhabit the same planet. Does not mean that racists and misogynists are part of what we do. So keep the fascists out, punch them, and then explain to them what they can do to not be fascist.
But also the issue with AI is that it's based on data, and it's based on essentially surveillance, and it's based on us wanting the product bad enough to give up our data. And I think that, it's like someone recently said, you're not in traffic, you are traffic. And I think that with AI, it's similar, honestly. So the other day I was like, I tried to remove all of like the Gen AI features from Google, and then it wouldn't filter my inbox into like, spam and not spam. And I was like, but hey, I want that. And then I had to put it back, and then it did the Gemini thing to me again. And I was like, so there's no way to remove Gemini without, and then it's like, well, you're not in traffic, you are traffic. I'm contributing to this because I want this tool for free and I'm not paying for it, etc. And I think that it's worth thinking about, because it's really hard to say, well, I'm not going to give up my data for this, but this is worth it. Like, for example, a pretty salient example is solar geoengineering. It's a kind of pretty dystopian technology. A lot of AI people believe in it. A lot of critical AI people are like, we're not going to engage with this, especially from the global south. But that means that the models that are being built essentially don't have that data. And so if this gets deployed, and I'm not saying it should, that means that it's liable to make things even worse for certain, like half of the world. Yeah, I know, but on the other hand, it's like, well, Europe and the States and whatever have all these projects, and they give all this data, and they collect all this data, and they have all this money and all these sensors, and the global south doesn't have the money, the sensors, and has a lot more pushback, which is great. But then if things do happen, it's even worse for them. And so it's really, really hard to say, like, we're not going to play ball, but we want to have, we want to have a seat at the table. And that's why it's like, I've tried to be a little bit less combative, because it's like, it's good to be there without giving up everything about yourself. So it's kind of like a balance, I guess.
Adheres to the diversity of tactics. Yeah. Okay, one final round of applause for our amazing panel.